While traveling across the sea, these tourists encounter a massive cruise ship that had mysteriously disappeared years ago. But the moment they step inside, their lives change forever. The adventure begins by showing a woman named Jess at home with her son Tommy. Jess takes great care of Tommy, who suffers from asthma, always keeping a close watch so he doesn't struggle to breathe. Because of this, Jess has avoided social life completely. After many years, she finally makes plans with her friends for a big sea trip. The idea is to enjoy the ocean while sailing on a boat. Jess decides not to bring Tommy along, leaving him at school where he can be looked after. While painting, Tommy accidentally spills color, becomes upset, and his mother comforts him, cleaning everything up. Even the smallest mistake embarrassed Tommy and triggered breathing problems, so Jess always had to stay alert. Finally, the day arrives for Jess's trip. She drops Tommy at school, then heads to the harbor where several boats are docked. One of them is named Triangle, owned by her friend Greg, who knows how to sail and prepares everything. Jess is joined by her other friends Sally and her friend Heather, along with two guys, Downey and Victor. But Greg notices that Jess seems unusually sad. When asked, she avoids giving details, only happy that everyone agreed to come, especially since gathering male friends for such a trip was tough. After loading the essentials, they set sail, unaware of the dark fate awaiting them. Greg keeps asking Jess if everything is okay, even suggesting she should have brought Tommy, but Jess doesn't reply and goes below deck to sleep. Soon, she dreams of being stranded on a beach for years without rescue, terrifying her into waking up. Heather asks about the dream, but Jess can't explain. She rejoins the group, helping sail, though everyone notices her strange behavior. She never shared her struggles, so nobody really knew what was going on. They continue their journey toward a mysterious region where no one has ever gone before, a secret known only to Greg and Victor, which may prove to be their greatest mistake. Suddenly, the wind dies, and the boat stalls. They don't understand why until they see dark storm clouds ahead, with a violent storm racing toward them. Panic spreads as Greg radios the Coast Guard, reporting their situation, but the guards see nothing unusual and dismiss any danger. Before Greg can explain further, their signal cuts off, the storm is too close. Now, disconnected and helpless, the group fears what's coming. Greg, having faced such danger before, instructs everyone to wear life suits. The boat could capsize, throwing them into the sea, but he urges them not to drown, only to climb back onto the overturned vessel if it comes to that. The group followed Greg's instructions as the storm drew dangerously close. Massive waves crashed against the boat, making it harder to balance. Most of them stayed inside while Victor and Greg fought to keep the vessel steady, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Greg kept an eye on Jess while Downey stayed close to Heather. For a while, the boat managed to survive the violent waves, but eventually, one enormous surge capsized it completely, throwing everyone into the sea. Thankfully, their life jackets kept them afloat as the storm raged on for several minutes before moving past them. Somehow, they all managed to climb onto the overturned boat, shaken but alive. Jess was safe, but when she looked around, she realized her friend Heather was missing. Everyone shouted her name, but there was no response, she had likely drowned. The group was devastated that a simple trip had already claimed a life, and now, stranded without a proper boat, they wondered how they would ever escape. Exhausted, they sat on the wreckage, taking deep breaths and trying to stay strong until help arrived, but there was no island or land in sight. Suddenly, they heard a sound, the deep hum of a massive cruise ship approaching. Overjoyed, they believed this was their chance to survive, though the sheer size of the vessel made them look like ants in comparison. They shouted for help, but the captain gave no response. At this point, Greg revealed something he had kept hidden. While contacting the Coast Guard earlier, a strange signal had connected to his radio, and he had briefly heard a woman screaming for help. The signal was cut almost immediately, and Greg never told anyone because they were already overwhelmed. Now, convinced this was the same ship, they decided to climb aboard and survive there. As they drew closer, Jess spotted a shadowy figure standing at the corner of the deck before vanishing inside, proof that someone was watching them. Fear gripped her, but with the others already climbing, she couldn't stay behind alone. One by one, they boarded, calling out, but no one answered. To their shock, the ship seemed completely abandoned. Exploring deeper, they discovered countless chambers, gathering resources and planning how to use the vessel to get rescued. Greg and Victor insisted on heading to the captain's room in search of someone, while Jess couldn't shake an uneasy familiarity with the place. She whispered to Greg that she had seen these corridors before, but he dismissed it, saying most ships had similar structures. Then Victor and Downey stumbled upon a photo frame, revealing that this very cruise ship was once named after a mythical god who had tricked death itself. The legend said this god possessed strange powers capable of destroying anyone who crossed his path. At first, everyone relaxed, thinking the ship was simply named after the mythical god, and all they really needed was to find the captain and ask to be taken home. But suddenly, they heard something drop. It sounded like someone else was already there. Investigating, they found a set of keys on the floor, and when Jess saw them, she froze. They were her house keys, complete with a photo of her son inside the keychain. The others grew suspicious, unsure how her keys could be here, but once she showed the photo of Tommy, they reluctantly believed her. Some guessed that maybe Heather had taken them and somehow made it onto the ship. Convinced they just needed to find Heather, they continued exploring and soon reached a grand ballroom, eerily set up as if for a party. To their shock, the food and drinks were perfectly fresh and in massive supply, enough to keep them alive for days. Victor started eating without hesitation, while Sally and Jess kept calling out for Heather, praying she was still alive. Suddenly, Jess saw someone dart past behind them and quickly alerted Victor, who ran after the figure. Whoever it was, they rushed upstairs using the staircase, and Victor followed without hesitation, climbing higher and higher until he was far out of sight. Unsure what to do, Greg finally decided to follow after him, and Jess went along so they could work together. Meanwhile, Downey stayed behind with Sally, both of them shaken and afraid in the massive, empty ship. As Victor climbed, he began to doubt if anyone was really there, but rather than go back, he resolved to keep climbing until he reached the captain's quarters. Down below, Jess kept telling Greg she was experiencing déjà vu, that she had seen all of this before, as if events were repeating themselves. Greg dismissed her, saying stress was making her lose her mind. Their argument was cut short when they heard noises from a nearby room. Carefully approaching, they discovered words scrawled in bright red across a mirror, written in what looked like fresh blood. The message read, "Go to the theater." Jess was horrified, but Greg brushed it off, insisting the crew was probably playing some elaborate prank on them. Jess, feeling mocked, stopped speaking to him and turned back toward the ballroom. Meanwhile, Downey and Sally noticed a trail of bloodstains on the floor, leading directly to the ship's theater room. Following them inside, they disappeared from sight. When Jess returned to the ballroom, she found it empty. The others had already gone. Confused and uneasy, she heard faint noises echoing through the walls around her, but couldn't make sense of them. Then, suddenly, Victor reappeared from behind. Victor staggered back into the room covered in blood, his body beaten and torn. Jess panicked and rushed to him, asking who had done this to him, but without a word, Victor suddenly lunged at her, trying to strangle her with brutal force. Confused and terrified, Jess couldn't even ask why he was attacking her, and in self-defense she struck him on the head, knocking him unconscious. Shaken, she ran toward the theater room where she had heard voices and found Downey and Sally crying hysterically. To her horror, Greg lay on the floor with a gunshot wound. Someone had shot him just moments earlier. When Jess tried to help, Downey and Sally turned on her, screaming that she was the one who had killed Greg. Shocked, Jess insisted she had been with Victor, but they accused her anyway, saying Greg himself had claimed she lured him to the theater to kill him. Before Jess could argue, gunfire rained down from above, bullets tearing into Downey and Sally. Jess barely escaped with her life, running blindly through the ship as the masked shooter advanced with a shotgun. She grabbed a kitchen knife for protection, ready to fight if cornered, but by sheer luck the killer passed without noticing her. Jess fled to the deck, but the figure soon appeared again, knocking her down and aiming the weapon at her. She realized the killer didn't know how to properly fire, so she shoved the gun aside, fought back, and escaped to a lower floor by jumping near the railings. The relentless killer chased her, forcing Jess to defend herself with an axe she found along the way. To her shock, beneath the mask was a woman, who hissed one cryptic warning: "To escape, you must kill them all." Jess couldn't understand what it meant, but in desperation, she struck until the masked woman tumbled overboard into the sea, vanishing beneath the waves. Finally breathing with relief, Jess thought it was over, until she heard strange music looping from a record player inside the ship. Switching it back on, she suddenly heard voices outside. She ran to the railing and froze in terror. Below, a small boat drifted toward the ship. On board were Jess and her friends, alive, calling for help. Staring in disbelief, Jess realized she was watching the exact moment they had first arrived at the cruise ship, even seeing herself among them. The impossible revelation left her paralyzed with fear, trapped in a nightmare with no way out. Jess couldn't understand what kind of mystery was unfolding on this ship. On one hand, all her friends were dead, and on the other, it felt like she was trapped inside a loop. Now, the Jess on the boat and her friends had already entered the ship. The first Jess, terrified, stayed hidden in a corner as these same incidents began to repeat. The original Jess silently listened to her duplicate Jess talking with Greg, realizing that every time she felt someone lurking around, it was her own real form watching. While sitting in distress, the original Jess dropped her keys, and the sound gave her away, prompting the others to come looking. She ran off immediately, hiding again in the shadows, witnessing how everything connected. Just like before, when everyone entered the hall to look for Haley and Jess thought she saw someone running, it was her original self observing them. Everything on this ship was interlinked, and the actual mystery was slowly revealing itself. Back when Victor ran off chasing a mysterious figure, he had no idea that the figure was Jess herself. The original Jess ran up to a deck and broke down crying, only for Victor to arrive moments later, shocked to see her already there. Looking into the water, Jess saw her own dead body being eaten by fish and birds, a horrifying sight. She tried to explain everything to Victor, insisting that something strange was happening on the ship, that the Jess in the hall was just a duplicate, and she was the real one, caught in this endless loop. She even showed Victor the dead bodies in the water, but they had already sunk. Victor didn't believe her, assuming she had lost her mind and insisting they return to the others and prepare to leave. Jess grew desperate, pleading with him to believe her. In a panic, she shoved him slightly, but he stumbled backward, slamming his head into a hook and collapsing, gravely injured. Horrified, Jess realized it was an accident, and she fled in tears, ending up in a locker room. There, she noticed several papers scattered across the floor, all carrying the same chilling message: kill them all to escape. Shocked, she recognized the handwriting as her own. Dozens of such notes were lying there, along with the very same jackets the masked killer had worn earlier. Opening a locker revealed rows of shotguns stored inside, confirming these were the weapons the killer had been carrying. Even more terrifying, she found her own locket hanging there, only to see piles of identical lockets already collected in the same spot. Her own locket slipped from her hands, joining the others. By now, Jess realized everything was repeating and wouldn't stop until everyone was dead. Voices echoed in her head, kill them all. Overwhelmed, she picked up a shotgun and loaded it with bullets. As she moved forward, she found Victor again, barely conscious. Pointing the gun at him, she told him she would fix everything if he just went inside and rested. This was the moment when the previous Jess entered the hall and Victor attacked her, only this time, the original Jess with the shotgun stormed in. Furious, she pointed the gun at her duplicate, shouting that everything was repeating again. With two Jesses standing before him, Victor finally began to realize that maybe, the original Jess had been telling the truth all along. For now, Jess told her duplicate to leave and turned her attention to Victor, trying to steady him and assure him that everything would be all right. But in the very next moment, the sharp crack of a gunshot echoed through the ship. Alarmed, the original Jess grabbed a gun and sprinted toward the theater room. What she found there was chilling. The masked killer stood above, relentlessly firing down at Greg, Downey, and Sally. Jess immediately returned fire, forcing the killer to retreat into the shadows. Greg had been badly wounded, and Jess quickly pulled Sally and Downey away from the chaos. As she helped them along, Jess tried to explain what was happening, that they were trapped in a loop, and the only way to break free was to change the pattern by doing things differently than before. Neither Downey nor Sally could fully grasp what she was saying, their faces pale with shock, but Jess pressed on. She handed them a gun and told them firmly to stay put, promising she would return for them soon. Moving swiftly across the deck, Jess noticed bloodstains on the floorboards. Her heart sank as she imagined that the injured Victor might have thrown himself overboard. Meanwhile, Sally and Downey, tense and frightened, were aiming their gun at a shadowed figure ahead. When the masked killer finally removed the mask, their blood ran cold. It wasn't a stranger at all, but the previous version of Jess. Seeing her face, Downey hesitated, unable to pull the trigger. The duplicate Jess seized the opportunity, insisting that Victor was likely dead, and that they needed to hunt down and kill the other Jess to survive. The original Jess called out desperately from a distance, but her duplicate had already lured Sally and Downey away, pretending to guide them to safety. She even handed Downey a chamber to rest, giving him the illusion of safety. But in a sudden, vicious twist, she pulled a knife from her pocket and drove it straight into him. Sally screamed in terror and bolted, while Downey collapsed, helpless, as the previous Jess finished him off with brutal efficiency. The original Jess heard the struggle from afar and rushed toward the sound, following Sally's trail. But Sally, panicked and confused, mistook her for the killer and fled into the engine room to hide. There, trembling, she managed to send out a distress call from the control panel, praying someone would receive it. The original Jess arrived moments later but found only the faint echo of the message still playing. That was when the realization struck. Back when they were first on the boat, Greg had picked up a mysterious woman's voice on his radio. That voice hadn't been random at all, it had been Sally's cry for help. Suddenly, noises rose from above. Jess climbed to the upper deck, only to freeze in horror. Dozens of bodies littered the floor, and every single one of them was Sally. The living Sally backed away in sheer terror, surrounded by her own lifeless duplicates. Jess hurried over, speaking softly, trying to calm her down, assuring her she wasn't the killer that had been hunting her. Sally, shaking, allowed herself to believe her, just barely, when another sound drew their attention. From the lower floor, Jess spotted a scene playing out, a version of herself struggling with the masked killer, pushing them over the railing and into the dark waters below. It was the same moment she had witnessed before, happening again, exactly as it had the first time. Down below, the duplicate Jess was now staring out over the rail, spotting another boat approaching, the same boat carrying Jess and her friends, calling out for help as they neared the cruise ship. The horrifying truth became undeniable. The cycle had restarted. Everything was looping once more. The original Jess had tried to alter the pattern, to change the outcome, but no matter what she did, the ship's curse pulled her back into the same endless nightmare. Jazz wanted everything to be fixed and got an idea. She saw her previous versions repeating her actions. One killed Victor, the other Downey. She threw Victor and Greg's bodies outside and wrote, "Go to the theater," on the mirror. Reaching Downey and Haley, she told them to meet her in the theater, where Greg was. Taking on the killer's form with a coat and mask, the original Jazz killed Greg and fired at Downey and Sally. The previous Jazz arrived, tried to escape, and they fought on the deck. Everything repeated in the loop. The masked Jazz warned, "You must kill everyone to break the pattern," but the previous Jazz pushed her into the water. Later, Jazz woke up at the shore, happy to survive and stay with her son, only to see another Jazz, showing the loop hadn't ended. Tommy's spilled paint triggered another attack, and in the chaos, the original Jazz finally killed the previous Jazz with a hammer, all witnessed by Tommy. So the original Jazz confronted and explained everything. After things seemed settled, she put the dead body in her car and left with her son. On the way, she hit a dead seagull and went to throw it aside, only to find many more dead seagulls lying around. The loop was repeating. Jazz and Tommy were stressed as she drove, but a collision caused a major accident, killing Jazz and her son. Everyone had gathered, but shockingly, another Jazz stood there, watching but confused. A taxi took her to the same port where she met her friends, planning another sea trip according to the loop. Jazz knew everything but acted unaware, trying to save her son, unaware that once trapped, she could never escape. And that's where this mind-bending story ends.